Parshas Shmini. This week's Parsha famously introduces the notion of kosher eating, of what animals may be eaten, what animals may not be eaten. But if we rewind to the beginning of the Parsha, it starts Vayhi Bayom HaShemini, and it was on the 8th day. What 8th day? The 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. So it happened to have been not only the 8th day of the inauguration, but as Rashi points out, Shmini Lamiluim, the 8th day of the completing of the offerings, and in marking the inauguration of the Mishkan after it was first assembled and used. And then he says, Hu Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It is also Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay. Now, a tragedy happens in between this introduction and the introduction of the types of food that we may eat and we may not eat, which we call the laws of kosher or of kashrut. And what happened was Nadav and Avihu, who are two of the sons of Aharon, a Kohen, of Aaron the priest, they enter into the Mishkan, and they bring, according to the simple explanation of the Torah, they bring an Eish Zara, they bring a strange fire. They weren't supposed to introduce it, they added on. Chazal, the rabbis, suggest numerous other transgressions that they committed, but for whatever the reason or reasons, they died a terrible death, a death of being immediately consumed by fire in the Mishkan. It was a terrible thing. And Aharon is praised for his restraint in his response. But it's still the inauguration of the Mishkan, and it's still Rosh Chodesh. The avoda, the service, must go on. And Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, Moses, specifically states, this is in Perek Yud, Pasuk Yud Beis, that's chapter 10, verse 12. Vaydaber Moshe el Aharon, ve'el el Azor, ve'el Isamar benov hanosarim. So Moshe says to Aharon, the Kohen, the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, and his remaining sons, Elazar and Isamar. And he says, continue the service. Kahu es ha-mincha noseres me'ishay Hashem. Take the mincha, the flour offering that remains from the korbanos, the offerings of the day. V'ichlua matzos eitz al mizbeach, and eat it with matzah, or as matzah, near the altar. Ki kodesh kodeshim hi. It is the highest level of sanctity. And they have to eat it in the holy place. That's the next verse. Yud Gimel v'achaltem osa b'makom kadosh. And skipping the rest of the verse. And then ve'es chazea tnufa ve'shok hatrumot tachlu b'makom tahor. And the special portions of the korbanos, of the meat, they don't have to eat in a holy place, but in a place that is tahor, that is pure. Which Rashi says is talking about the camp that from which if a mitzora were to become tamei, he would have to leave, or become a mitzora, he would have to leave. Okay, so the Kohanim, Aaron Kohen, and his sons are commanded, despite the tragedy and despite their loss, despite the fact that they are onanim. An onain is somebody who is in the period immediately following a death and extended to the time of the burial. There may be differences depending on one's obligations and when it happens, but the general rule is, even today, that between the time of the death of somebody for whom we are required to sit shiva, which is parents, children, or siblings, or a spouse, and the burial, that we don't perform affirmative mitzvos. We don't perform mitzvos haseh, even midrabanan. We only are careful about avoiding prohibited activity. So, for example, no davening, no prayer. We don't put on tefillin. We don't say brachos. I remember when my father passed away, Zichron Livracha, and I was on the flight to Israel for his burial, and I left the bathroom. Normally we say prayer of Asher Yatzar, and it's very routine for people who say it regularly, and it requires a certain mindfulness to not say brachos or to eat food without saying brachos. It's unusual and it's strange, and that's the law. Now, concerning Kohanim, they're not allowed to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, there are different constraints depending on how it happened and when it happened and how long it goes, but let's just take a general rule that a Kohen does not do the service, certainly not Kohanim Hedyotim, and they don't eat from the korban. But Moshe Rabbeinu said, you got to eat. So that's presumably what they did. However, we see later on, it says, Dorash Moshe, this is now Pasuk Tes Vav, Tes Zayin, this is verse 16. It says that, Sir Chatos, Dorosh Dorash Moshe. So concerning the Sir Chatos, which Rashi explains is the korban for Rosh Chodesh, says it was burned. They didn't eat it. So Moshe got angry, recorded as being angry. Vayikra al Elazar v'al Isamar b'nei Aharon and Osir more. And so Moshe got angry he directed his anger towards Aaron's two sons, to Elazar and Isamar. Rashi comments that he was really angry with Aharon as well, except that he had a great degree of respect and reverence for his brother Aharon, for his older brother. So he directed it towards the sons. The commentaries discuss why that was okay to direct the anger towards the sons, but we note that Aharon expresses his objection, and he says, Madua, and he asks the question. He said, Madua lo achaltem esachatos b'mokom kadosh? Why didn't you eat the sin offering in a holy place? Ki kodesh kodoshim hi, it has to be in a holy place because the chatos of Rosh Chodesh is a holy, it's on the highest level of sanctity. Vosa nasan lochem losesis avonoida, and this is brought on a monthly basis to achieve atonement for the people, for the children of Israel, chaper alehem lifnei Hashem, to purify them. And then the next verse, Moshe suggests that there might be other factors that would render a korban not fit for consumption, but it should be burned. For example, if the blood was sprinkled in the wrong place, or if it was tamei, and he rules all of them out. He says, "Hein lo huvaz namal kodesh penima." The blood was not sprinkled on the inside of the kodesh, which would have rendered it achol tochlu oso b'kodesh kashet zivisi. You should have eaten it in the holy place, as I told you. Moshe responds. Now, to understand this response, we need a little bit of introduction, which is that there are two types of korbanos, or many types of korbanos, but these are categories. There are once in a lifetime korbanos, once in history korbanos, which is the korbanos that we talked about, the miluim, the inaugural korbanos, and then there is the korban of the nasi, and in this case it was Nachshon ben Aminadav, and those two were only brought once, and that's it. And then there's the korban of Rosh Chodesh, which is brought regularly. So the first one is called Kodshe Sha'ah. They are holy offerings brought only for that time. And then there are Kodshe Doros, which are brought on a regular basis throughout the generations, so long as the service is continuing in the Beis HaMikdash. May it be speedily rebuilt in our days. So Aharon says, we brought those, the other korbanos, but then these things, an allusion to the tragedy of his losing two of his sons, happened. He's now an onen. He's, first of all, he's, you might say, discombobulated, totally. And secondly, the halacha is generally that a kohen does not perform the service in aninus, or certainly does not eat ba'aninus when he's in this status. So he says, "V'achalti chatas hayom," and I would eat this chatos hayta b'nei Hashem. Would this be pleasing? Would it be good in the eyes of God? Ibn Ezra has a slightly different reading, but this is the basic thrust. In other words, Aharon is saying, wait a second, according to Rashi, he says, what you said applied to the Kodshe Shah, it applied to the special offerings of the day, of the time, which were on the inauguration of the Mishkan. That happened only once. It's on the 8th day, and it happened with the offering of the Nesiim of Nachshon ben Aminadav. But it did not happen. You did not tell us that you got this command that we should eat the offerings, we should continue with the service in its regular way concerning the korban of Rosh Chodesh. You didn't say that. So I assumed that the regular laws apply, and therefore we didn't eat it, but rather we did what we had to do with the korban if we can't eat it, which is that we burned it completely. How did Moshe respond? Vayishma Moshe vayta beinav. He heard it, and it was good in his eyes. In other words, Moshe emes v'saraso emes. Moshe is a man dedicated to truth, not to his ego. Moshe is anav mikol adam. He is the humblest of people on this earth. And he challenged Aharon and his children and his sons because he had to, because this was the will of God, and Moshe was the man in charge. And he examined, Dorosh Dorash. He looked into it, and he said, this is not appropriate. And he brought it to Aharon, and Aharon responded, and Moshe said, you know what? You're right. Hashem did tell me to tell you to eat only those special korbanos, those once in history korbanos. He did not direct his command concerning the offering of Rosh Chodesh, which is brought on a regular basis. Aharon, my brother, you are right. And Rashi says, Hodeh v'lo bosh lomar lo shamati. He admitted that Aharon was right and he was wrong, and he was not embarrassed. He was not constrained from saying, I didn't learn that halacha, just like you said. And in other places, Chazal say, Ashrei Hador, Happy is the generation whose leaders admit their error. Why is this episode cited here? Why didn't it just say, the Kodshe Shah are eaten ba'aninus. The Kodshe Rosh Chodesh, Kodshe Doros are not eaten ba'aninus. Why this drama? I believe the answer is because we understand that leadership means, number one, it doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. We don't believe in human infallibility. There's only one being that's infallible, and that's the Almighty. And the second is that a fallible leader, human being, Moshe was pretty darn close to perfect, but not there. He was not among those who are recorded as having not sinned. And when he was confronted with a rationale about why his opinion was not correct, he admitted, and he was happy about it. Vayikra beinav. It doesn't just say Vayishma Moshe. It doesn't just say Vayaskein. It says Vayikra beinav. And the Meforshim point out that means that Moshe was happy to learn the truth, even though it meant that he was wrong. May we all emulate Moshe Rabbeinu. Have a good Shabbos.